So before I talk about the grand finale of the God of War Greek saga, I feel it's only right to take a little detour and take a look at some of the other smaller games that this franchise has to offer. Though it's mostly known for console games, the God of War series has had a few portable spin-offs here and there. Merely a few months after the success of God of War 2, the franchise would get its first portable spin-off under the title God of War Betrayal. Unfortunately, it's not as easily accessible these days since it was on Java phones, so you're gonna need a Java emulator if you're really curious to try this obscure and often forgotten entry in the series. From what I can see, it's basically a 2D side-scroller with the God of War mechanics. And the sprite for Kratos used in that game is actually the same sprite that was used in his Death Battle debut. Can't wait to see him fight Ashura. In March 2008, a year after God of War 2 released, the series would get its first true portable spin-off on the PlayStation line of systems. This game would be titled God of War Chains of Olympus, released on the PlayStation Portable and set before the events of God of War 1. 2 years later, we would get another game titled Ghost of Sparta, set before the events of God of War 2. Both of these games would be developed by Ready at Dawn Studios, with Sony Santa Monica offering assistant development. And unfortunately, as of August this year, Ready at Dawn has closed its doors. They didn't seem to have many titles under their belt, but it is still a shame. RIP. When being tasked with developing Chains of Olympus, Ready at Dawn were a smaller company at the time, and it was a good thing that Sony Santa Monica were there to assist them with the development of the game, and Cory Barlog was still working as a writer on both games, so things didn't seem too bad. Upon release, both games got generally good enough reviews. They may not have been as heavily praised as the console games, but they were praised for bringing the epic God of War action we know and love to a handheld device. The PlayStation Portable was basically Sony's attempt to take over the handheld market after they won the 6th generation console war with the Dreamcast killer, the motherfucking PlayStation 2. And the PlayStation Portable's gimmick was, well, it's essentially a PlayStation 2, but now you can bring it out on the go! More conveniently anyways. The PSP was an impressive handheld for its time. Though not as powerful as the PS2, it was still close enough to give you the feeling that you really were getting the PlayStation experience on the go. So it certainly lived up to the name PlayStation Portable. Unfortunately, I myself do not own a PSP since I was a DS kid. And let's be real, as impressive as the PSP was, it had nothing on the ludicrously genius gimmick of the Nintendo DS. That and because it had unique games. Though luckily, just like God of War 1 and 2, Chains of Olympus and Ghost of Sparta also got the HD collection treatment on the PlayStation 3. This collection was titled God of War Origins Collection in the US, and the God of War Volume 2 collection over here in Europe. However, unlike the first God of War collection that was handled by Blue Point Games, which handled the Uncharted Nathan Drake collection, the Volume 2 collection was handled by Ready at Dawn themselves. And just like the first collection, Volume 2 brings Chains of Olympus and Ghost of Sparta to widescreen, gives them a slight visual upgrade, and PlayStation Trophy support. The Volume 2 collection is the version I will be using to take a look at these two games, since it's the only versions of the two games that I have access to. And again, I don't have a PSP of my own. Also, one more thing I believe I should clarify before moving on. Yes, I am aware that God of War Ghost of Sparta released a few months after God of War 3, and may have some mechanics that were introduced in God of War 3, but since both of these are short games that were initially released on the same handheld device, and since both games have a bit of extra lore that helps fill in some gaps that the original trilogy left out, I feel it's only right to talk about these two chapters in Kratos' story, before moving on to the final chronological chapter in the God of War Greek saga. Hey, but what about Ascension? I will get to that game when I feel like it, okay? Okay, let's get this going. As I stated earlier, God of War Chains of Olympus takes place before the first game. So how is the series' first true entry on a handheld device? Is it a worthwhile experience? Well, yes and no. For being made with the PlayStation Portable in mind, Chains of Olympus manages to maintain just about everything you would want from a God of War game at the time. The engaging and bloody combat, appealing visuals, and a decent story, I guess. Even just looking at footage of the game running on the PSP, the game still looks good for its time as its console counterparts. Though a small amount of cutscenes are still images, most of them are still fully animated, just like the console games. So the immersion is not lost, I guess. Since this game takes place before God of War 1, this is during the time when Kratos is still in service of the Greek gods, hoping that they will fulfill their agreement to rid him of the nightmares of killing his wife and daughter. The gods have tasked Kratos with defending Greece from a Persian army invasion. Kratos confronts the Persian king, who mocks him for being the Olympians' messenger boy, and Kratos shows that though he's a slave to the gods, he is no one's messenger boy. He is a delivery boy! After killing a giant basilisk, Kratos vents his frustration to the gods for their false promises, before the sun unexpectedly falls from the sky! This leads Kratos to traveling to the underworld of Tartarus to rescue the sun god Helios, who had been captured by the titan Atlas, and the god of dreams Morpheus has put the rest of the gods into a deep slumber, making them even more of a bunch of useless cunts than they already are. Kratos ventures through the pits of Hades and Tartarus to find Helios, only to hear a familiar flute melody played by his daughter Calliope. According to Valhalla, Kratos carved his daughter a flute as a birthday gift, and that she played it all the time, so he knows the melody all too well. After beating the ferryman of the underworld to death with Zeus's gauntlet, which I guess just happened to be lying around down there, Kratos notices his daughter on the shoreline and he follows her, leading him to the goddess of the underworld and wife of Hades, Persephone. She offers to let Kratos be with his daughter in Elysium if he gives a tree his weapons and sins. I'm not kidding, it's the best way I can put it. Anyways, Kratos loses his powers and red marks, granting him entry to the fields of Elysium, where he finally reunites with Calliope. However, this reunion is cut very short, as Persephone foolishly reveals that she was the ringleader behind this whole mess. She tells Kratos that she is absolutely sick of being bound to the underworld, and literally wants to destroy all of existence, including Elysium. And without Helios to restore the sunlight, Morpheus is free to run rampant and plunge the world into eternal darkness. And Kratos is left with a difficult choice. Either spend the last moments of his existence with his daughter, or leave her to stop Persephone's plans and save everyone's lives, including hers. And this leads to the saddest button mashing sequence in video game history, as Kratos is forced to push his own daughter away as she begs him not to leave her. Ugh, game! Why are you making me do this? Though I will say, this is a pretty well done moment, because it makes you, the player, feel like a piece of shit. In order to regain his powers, Kratos kills a bunch of people's souls to reclaim his sins, I guess? Calliope watches in horror as her father reverts back to the monster he once was, as Kratos sorrowfully walks away, never to see his daughter again. Kratos beats Persephone in a very easy boss fight, and leaves Atlas chained to hold the world on his shoulders. Atlas questions Kratos why he continues to serve the gods, with Kratos saying it's all he has left. Even Kratos himself is unsure that the gods will fulfill their promise to him, but at this point, he's just desperate. Atlas warns Kratos that he would regret what he did to him, and that they would meet again, which explains why the two knew each other during their encounter in God of War 2. And that's pretty much the end of the story. Kratos returns Helios' chariot to the sky, before falling from exhaustion. However, he's caught by Athena and Helios. They take Kratos' weapons away before leaving him on the cliff unconscious. Bastards. As you can tell, this story was very short. In fact, on the PlayStation 3 version, the trophy you get for beating the story even says, "Over already?" Even the developers knew that this game was shorter than your average God of War game. I know that this game was on the PSP and the budget probably wasn't as big as the other two games, but still. As for the gameplay, it's the same old God of War action you're probably familiar with by now. You got your Blades of Chaos with all the same moves as before, and you keep upgrading them with red orbs to unlock the moves such as the Cyclone of Chaos and Tartarus Rage. I also learned the power of grappling enemies in midair. Satisfying! Oh, and since the PSP lacks a second analog stick, you now perform the dodge roll using L1 and the left stick. But thankfully, the PlayStation 3 version gives you the option to dodge with the right analog stick just like in the other games. Of course, with a new God of War game comes new weapons and magic attacks. And as usual, you collect red orbs from killing enemies, opening chests, and getting busy.
Oh, sweet. Portable sex. What? It's God of War! Come on. Even Nintendo fans are virgins.
You upgrade your health and magic with the same items acquired in chests, so I have no need to go over them again, as this goes for all the games until the Norse saga. Firstly, we have the Sun Shield, which is used for certain puzzles and can block enemy attacks and even counter them. So this was technically the first God of War game to incorporate shield combat before the Norse games did it. Next we have the Infinity Gauntlet, Zeus's Gauntlet, which I guess just happened to be lying around in Tartarus. And you punch enemies with it. And break walls. Cool I guess. The magic attacks are now activated using R1 in combination with one of the face buttons, in correspondence to the magic attack you choose. This is probably due to the PSP not having L2 or R2. So firstly we have Ifrit, acquired after killing the Persian king. You can summon this demon by pressing R1 and triangle, and deal some damage to enemies. And... wait, what were the other ones again? The other two magic attacks are projectile attacks. And I honestly can't tell the difference between the two. One is a light, one is orbs. Yeah, I gotta say, this game so far has the most uninteresting weapons and magic attacks. I suppose it is cool that the Ifrit originates from Arabian mythology, but in gameplay, it's really nothing more than bashing the ground for a bit. And the other two magic attacks are just projectiles. Overall, I don't think any of them are bad. They all still work at the end of the day, but I don't know. Compared to the ones offered in the other games, this game's weapons and magic attacks just aren't really that interesting in my opinion. And that's about it for God of War Chains of Olympus, to be honest. So, despite all its shortcomings, is it still a worthy enough addition to the God of War canon that's worth going out of your way to play? Kinda. I mean, it pretty much has everything you would expect from a God of War game at that point. A short but decent story, the fun combat, the Blades of Chaos being reliable and satisfying as usual, cool action, and appealing visuals. Again, this game's visuals do hold up well against its PS2 predecessors. But this game is so far the shortest in the series, with the weakest weapon and magic attack lineup. And I would even say it has the weakest villain in the series so far. Sure, Ares is also a dumbass, but at least he was an active threat throughout God of War 1. Persephone just tricks Kratos into giving her the perfect opportunity to proceed with her plan to wipe out all of existence. But no! She straight up tells Kratos her plan, leading to him putting an end to that plan not even 5 minutes later! Like seriously, why do these villains have the same glaring flaw? With them flat out telling Kratos their intentions leading to their downfall. And again, Ares, despite his issues, is still a much better antagonist than this dumb bitch. Though Kratos' daughter Calliope being a prominent character in the story was a good way of showing Kratos' humanity, and that even in the darkest period of his life, he's always been a loving father. And taking a satisfying game mechanic like button mashing, and turning it into one of the most heartbreaking moments in the series, heck, maybe even in video game stories in general. Oh, and I guess that this game also shows how much of a bunch of jerks the Greek gods were to Kratos, for not rewarding him after how much hell he went through for them. So overall, I would say God of War Chains of Olympus is a decent enough addition to the series, and I can't deny how impressive it is for being the first true portable entry in the series, and how much Ready at Dawn managed to maintain what made the console games good, and cram it all onto a UMD. Though the short campaign, weak villain, and not as cool magic and weapon attacks do bring this one down. I would probably appreciate it more if I played it on an actual PSP, Because again, it is still impressive for how much they managed to put on a handheld device, and it does still feel like a God of War game, just not as good as its predecessors or successors. So if there's any way to finish this off, I will finish off with my most appropriate statement for my overall verdict on this game. It's better than Sonic Forces. So, with all of Chains of Olympus's flaws, the obvious question is, does the next game improve upon its predecessor? Well, to cut to the chase, yes. God of War Ghost of Sparta released 2 years later, and is set after the events of God of War 1, and just before the events of God of War 2. And let me just say, that this is a much more noteworthy addition to the God of War canon, as it gives us much more insight to Kratos' backstory. To start off, this game has a much stronger opening than Chains of Olympus, as Kratos has set sail to the Kingdom of Atlantis to find answers on nightmares haunting him. To be clear, these are not the nightmares of his past that the gods refuse to relieve him of, which he makes very clear to Athena that he's still pissed off about it. Rather, these nightmares he's been having as of late are of the future, of his mother being held captive in Atlantis. Hang on a second, this is literally just Attack of the Clones! I hate you! Kratos infiltrates the Kingdom of Atlantis to find his mother in a weakened state. Callisto informs her son that his brother Deimos is still alive and in the captivity of Thanatos, the god of death. She apologizes to Kratos for lying to him about Deimos' circumstances, but that his father forbade her from telling him. Kratos is in disbelief and questions his mother on who his father is. Callisto tries to tell him, but due to a curse placed on her by Kratos' prick of a father, she turns into a monster, leaving Kratos with no option but to kill his own mother to save his own life. Callisto reverts back to her human form, and in her last moments, she encourages Kratos to find his brother before dying in his arms. And Kratos is understandably shaken, as he asks himself,
what have I done?
Jeez, this guy got done so dirty. It wasn't enough that a god tricked him into killing his wife and daughter, the gods also had to go and make him kill his own mother. That's just so tragic, man. And we can see in many moments throughout the game, how Kratos is just so done with the gods' bullshit. And even goes as far as sinking the entire Kingdom of Atlantis. And as usual, we can tell that the gods are absolutely useless since Poseidon wasn't even present to defend his kingdom.
What the hell happened to my kingdom? Did Neptune do this because I just beat him in chess?
Kratos returns to Sparta to retrieve the key to Death's domain, his weapons, and getting busy with 8 chicks for the price of 1. Also, it's actually cool how we get to visit Sparta briefly, since this is Kratos' home and where he's worshipped as the god of war. And a bunch of Spartans pull down Ares' statue to build a new one in Kratos' honor. Kratos also comes across his childhood home and reminisces himself and Deimos playing outside, aspiring to be great warriors and laughing and having fun. Even if it's just for a brief moment, it's hard to imagine Kratos having fun, even as a child. We then get a small gameplay segment of Kratos and Deimos training, with Kratos showing off his usual attitude that we're used to. He bests Deimos in combat and drills into him that Spartans stand tall even in death. He helps Deimos off his back before they're attacked by 2 mysterious gods, whom we know as Ares and Athena. Ares grabs Deimos as Kratos desperately tries to protect his brother, but Ares smacks him in the eye, leaving a scar. Ares attempts to finish Kratos off, before Athena forbids him from doing so, as they only came for the marked warrior. They escape as Deimos cries for his brother to save him, with Kratos helplessly watching as they drag him away. Fast forward to the present, Kratos manages to make his way to the domain of death, and finds Deimos, who has been tortured and tormented for most of his life, leaving most of his humanity and love for his brother stripped away from him. Kratos may have gone through hell to save Deimos, but he was just too late, as Deimos was just too far gone, and wasn't in the mood to make amends. Deimos almost manages to kill the brother that failed to protect him, before Thanatos intervenes and intends to kill Deimos as revenge towards Kratos for killing his daughter earlier in the game. Kratos saves Deimos from falling from a cliff, and just like that, they are bros again. Yeah, not even 5 minutes after their bloody reunion, they're already square again. Kratos gives Deimos his spear and shield, and together they take on Thanatos. Thanatos gloats about Ares being the dumbass he was by kidnapping the wrong marked warrior. You see, after the Great War against the Titans, the gods were informed by an oracle of a prophecy that a marked warrior would bring the destruction of Olympus, and they presumed that Deimos, being the kid with the distinctive red birthmarks, was the one who would bring Olympus to ruin. But of course, they inadvertently set that prophecy they wanted to avoid in motion, as Kratos would don his signature red tattoo as a tribute to Deimos, and would be the true marked warrior who would eventually bring the destruction of Olympus. The two brothers battle Thanatos, but Thanatos manages to land a killing blow on Deimos. And after losing his brother for real, not 10 minutes after they were reunited and made amends, Kratos goes absolutely berserk as his blades burn wilder and deadlier than they ever have before.
The flames of disaster!
I take back what I said in the last video. This moment right here is Kratos' mental breaking point. Because this is probably the angriest we have ever seen him in the whole series. And who could blame him after losing his mother and brother on the same day? Kratos ruthlessly assaults Thanatos until he lands a fatal stab to his heart as he stares straight into the face of death himself. After that bloody battle, Kratos carries Deimos' lifeless corpse to the top of the mountain, where the suspicious gravedigger from the first game, who freed him from Hades, had a fresh grave dug for Deimos. Eerily, Deimos' grave just so happens to be on the same mountain Kratos was left on top of at the end of Chains of Olympus, and the very same mountain where Kratos tried to end his own life in the first game, after the gods broke their promise to relieve him of his nightmares. Kratos questions himself what he has become, with the gravedigger replying that he has become death. I mean, he literally just did kill death himself, so yeah. Athena walks out of the gates of Olympus to congratulate Kratos, before the latter asks in a disgusted tone if making his life a misery is all a game to her. Kratos warns Athena that the gods would pay for this before walking back to his throne room. And Athena says to herself, "Forgive me, brother." So that about sums up the story. And I have to say, this is a good follow-up to God of War 1, and a great prequel to God of War 2, as it helps us further understand how Kratos was screwed over by the gods, and how he was further pushed into becoming a monster, and going on a path of destruction by God of War 2. So again, despite the pacing issues in the third act, this story is a worthwhile addition to the God of War lore. But how about the gameplay? Well, I am happy to report that Ghost of Sparta's level design and weapon/magic attacks are much better than its predecessor. The levels and puzzles are much more engaging, with a good amount of platforming with timing as a factor. I guess God of War is slowly becoming Uncharted. And the grappling mechanic from God of War 2 is back, and it works just as well as before, though now you use circle to grapple, which again is probably due to the PSP not having R2 or L2. And it is even utilized in the underwater sections, which is cool. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention this in the first two videos, so I'm gonna say it now. In the underwater sections, you can press R1 to do an underwater dash, which you use to break through certain obstacles. I know that this is the third God of War video I've done, but there it is anyway. Now like and subscribe. The combat is largely unchanged with the same old good fighting mechanics. However, this game does introduce a charge attack. By pressing L1 and circle, Kratos will just charge straight at an enemy and pin them down to the ground. And he will beat them or throw them, and it's really freaking useful. I don't think this was introduced in God of War 3, but yeah. Oh, and the parry mechanic is back, even though Kratos doesn't have the Golden Fleece or the Sun Shield. but it's still cool that it's available. And of course, since this game is set between God of War 1 and 2, the blades are currently in the form of the Blades of Athena, but they work as they normally do. They cover a good range, and you got your good old Cyclone of Chaos to help you defeat a good bunch of enemies. Also, I really like the gold blades and the blue magic on them. However, they are given a new mechanic. After Kratos takes the Titan Thera's power, causing Atlantis to crumble, his blades are granted more firepower. You now have a third bar under the health and magic bars, which represents the blade's firepower. By holding R1 or R2, Kratos can unleash
The flames of disaster!
dealing more damage to enemies and being able to cut through their armor. I gotta say, it's an interesting mechanic. And you can upgrade the bar by collecting Minotaur horns found in chests. The Minotaur horns were technically introduced in God of War 3, which I will get to when I review that game. So because the Flames of Disaster mechanic is relegated to R1, the weapon controls is now mapped to the D-pad. When Kratos returns to Sparta, Alex the last Spartan gives him his spear and shield, a moment that further shows Kratos' respect for Alex. This set of weapons is called the Arms of Sparta, and it works pretty well. You can throw an unlimited amount of spears, somehow. I understand that the Draupnir spear in Ragnarok is made from a ring that duplicates itself, but as the description implies, this is just a regular ass spear that Kratos used when he was just an average Spartan warrior. Whatever. As for the magic attacks, they're a lot more useful than the ones that Chains of Olympus offered. First up is the Eye of Atlantis, a device that shoots a beam of lightning at enemies. Cool. The Scourge of Arenas. After fighting Thanatos' daughter, Kratos will take her power, allowing him to shoot balls of light that damage enemies and drain their health. Cool. And lastly, we've got the Horn of Boreas. It summons wind. Yeah, it's cool. Overall, decent weapons and magic selection. And I guess that's about it for Ghost of Sparta. And I must say, I'm impressed. This game is a noticeable step up from Chains of Olympus, in terms of story, gameplay, and level design. The story may not be perfect, but it's still a significant chapter in Kratos' journey, and one that you may want to think twice about skipping over. And I believe that this is one of T.C. Carson's best performances as Kratos. The voice acting in both games is well done by all the cast, but I think this game is the one where T.C. Carson got to shine the most for portraying the tragic character of Kratos. He can bring Kratos into a downer mood, showing the pain he's going through, and make him ballistically angry when he needs to be. Overall, to sum up my thoughts on both games, it was an interesting experience. To take a look at some of the series' smaller spin-offs made for a handheld device. Ready at Dawn did a pretty good job at bringing the God of War experience onto the PlayStation Portable, and maintaining most of what made the console games enjoyable, from the appealing visuals, the engaging combat, the dynamic action, and the bloody QuickTime events. Chains of Olympus might not have had the best story, but Ghost of Sparta certainly was a worthwhile experience despite its short length. If you want to play these games for yourself, I would recommend getting them on the original PSP hardware, if you want to fully appreciate them, considering they were made with the limitations of the device in mind. But if you want to play with a controller like a proper God of War game, there is the Volume 2 collection on the PlayStation 3, and it has the PlayStation trophy, so there you go. However, this collection does go for very high prices these days, including Ghost of Sparta on PSP, but thankfully, both the original versions of each game and their HD counterpart are still available for purchase via the PlayStation 3 store, so if you want to get these games cheaper, get them while you still can before the PlayStation 3 store inevitably closes sometime in the future. This part of this retrospective was certainly an interesting one for me to make, as unlike the other games in the franchise, this was my first time playing through the PSP games all the way through, so this review is based on my initial impressions of these two titles. And now that they're out of the way, the next game in this franchise I will be taking a look at will be the grand finale of the Greek saga, God of War 3.